Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronx Night's program, and if you don't already know, where we talk to reporters and writers and editors and journalists and people who put stuff out in the Bronx so that you can find out who they are and what they do and what motivates them, et cetera, et cetera. Get a little background. And in our second segment this evening, we're going to be talking about a Bronx community that has been through a lot but still survives and still has pride. So we'll do that in our second segment. But in our first segment, let's say hello once again to our favorite Bronx reporter from the city. It is Jonathan Custodio. Nice to see you, Jonathan.
Nice to see you again.
And certainly I and many Bronxites want to thank you because you were the reporter that broke this story, that put it out in the public, that the city from the mayor's office was planning or would like to build a 34,000 seat cricket stadium temporarily in Cortlandt Park. So let's just talk about the breaking of the news, what you found out, and then we'll break down where we're at.
Yeah, so essentially, the Mayor Eric Adams' administration had their sights set on building a 34,000 seat cricket stadium, like you said, on the Cortlandt Park parade grounds. This would be for a June 2024 international cricket tournament next year with the International Cricket Conference. It's the first Cricket Council. It's the first time that they're bringing this tournament to the U.S., and New York City wants to be one of those cities to host it. And they're floating Cortlandt Park. They still have not heard if the ICC will choose them as one of the hosts, but it's ruffled a lot of feathers. It's a park that's heavily used. People play all kinds of sports there, including cricket, baseball, soccer. People bring their families for picnics. They use the track to run, bike, whatever it is. And there are a lot of concerns that the stadium, which according to a proposal from the ICC would be temporary, we're not really sure what that would entail, what parameters would be set that the city would be mandated to take it down.
The idea in what you reported is that they wanted it for 6 months to build it and then for 2 weeks to play the tournament. I understand that it's not even the championship round, that it's just one of the playoff rounds leading to the actual World Cup match. And there were so many questions out there. You had to ferret out information. Apparently, it was not something that the mayor said out loud. It was kind of like people kind of found out about it, and they still have been rather closed mouth about it, haven't they?
Yes, it's been tough to get them to even acknowledge the plan itself. But at this point, everybody in the community knows about it. The local community board has been very vocal about it. Elected officials have been vocal about it. And some of the concerns that they've expressed is that the city would need to get state approval to alienate any portion of parkland for private use. In addition, people are very concerned that it would damage the park. And yeah, it would kind of be significant blowback to people who are already kind of who already feel betrayed by previous development there.
Previous developments, specifically the water filtration plant, right?
Yeah.
That was built in another part of the park. And there were promises still unkept. I mean, we don't have to go into that. It was supposed to be underground, and it's 3 stories overground, and they still haven't figured out 20 years later how to build the golf house. I mean, plus all the other things. It was supposed to be under $1 billion, and it ended up being 3.2 billion. We could spend all day on that. But you mentioned the alienation question. What is said by some is that, well, it's not a permanent structure, so you don't need alienation. Yet, of course, many advocates and lawyers and others have said you do need alienation. If they were to go through that process, that takes a year or 2 years. You're not going to get it ready by June 2024.
Yeah, the timeline is ambitious to say the least. The state legislature doesn't come back in session until January. Which would be right around the time that construction was set to begin. So essentially, they would need to get that across the finish line.
And do you think either the mayor was unaware of that possibility? He and the people around him, of course, thought that it wasn't going to be necessary, or they just decided they could do it and without, we're just going to ignore it. I mean, it just seems inconceivable to me that the mayor and the people around him and the people in the parks department aren't aware that if you take parkland, you're going to have to deal with the alienation in some form. I mean, you can't just sign it away like you would, an empty lot.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the mayor is thinking. I'd love to know. They haven't been public really about what their thought process is on this, but it's a tight window, and it's an example of one of the issues that people in the neighborhood and local elected officials have really had issues with, is just the lack of transparency and sort of public notice here. So
yeah.
It's very representative of those frustrations.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Then you wrote a follow-up story a little bit later that dozens of Bronx groups object to it. 29 groups signed, as you reported, signed a letter saying we don't support this. One of the big things, where are all those people going to park? I mean, look at 34,000 people. Citi Field holds 42, and look at the size of the parking facility they need. And then, you mentioned, well, okay, they're going to build it. It'll take 6 months. Then how long does it take it down? And then if they've damaged, the lawn, they said they're going to put some synthetic turf for the cricket pitches, but that doesn't answer the questions about, there's just so many questions that I don't get. Trucks coming, are they just going to roll across the parade grounds to construction material, equipment? I'm just not clear on how this is going to work.
Yeah, and these are like very serious logistics that people need to run through, and it goes back to just like there haven't been any public meetings about this, ways for people to discuss kind of their feelings or suggestions or anything like that. And the parking, Citi Field has like multiple parking lots.
Well, of course,
and it's just does not compare at all to what's available in the Van Cortlandt area. And these are some of the smaller logistics that they have to get through. Like they still need to do the alienation of parkland. They still would need to focus on the entire land review process, which takes a couple of years sometimes.
I'm going to ask you a very unfair question. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think the mayor's are going to come out and say, look, we believe in this, we think it's a good idea? I mean, there have been petitions on the other side of people who have said, hey, we like this idea. We think, they talked about $150 million of financial benefit. I'm not exactly sure who's going to benefit and how they're going to benefit, but they talked about that. Do you think the mayor is just going to blow ahead and do it, or and wait to be sued? Because that the 29 groups, they're going to get together and then they're going to do what they can to stop it. Do you have a sense of what's going to happen?
It's really hard to say.
Yeah. How unfair of me.
If the mayor were to try to press forward, it's incredibly risky, because if they don't have all their legal precedents set, all their I's dotted and T's crossed, any lawsuit could slow down the project if it's successful. And if a judge puts an injunction on it, that would delay it, which is essentially just a nail in the coffin. So yeah, they have to be very careful.
So we'll see, and we'll trust that you will have your ear to the ground, and we'll tell people to look at thecity.org and read Jonathan's stuff. Listen, you also wrote something which it actually is connected in a way. The daylighting of Tibbetts Brook was approved to the tune of $130 million. And why don't you describe it? But then you wrote I thought, a very smart article about what could still derail it, or what is still needed to be done if, in fact, they open up the Tibbetts Brook to flow, down into the Harlem River.
Yeah, so Tibbetts Brook is the Tibbetts Brook project has been long in the making. Decades advocates have been working on it, and what it will entail is essentially bringing water that's underground above ground to sort of decrease the strain on the local sewer system. And this would mitigate flooding and also increase the greenery in the park. And they would also add a greenway, which think about maybe like 2 miles long. That would go all the way to 230th Street. and this would ultimately connect with the Harlem River Greenway plan that the mayors announced earlier this year that they're trying to
Right.
push.
And advocates have been working on this for 20 years. I mean, this is a way to really solve a lot of environmental issues, specifically flooding on the Major Deegan. God forbid there be another hurricane. So what's the wrinkle with the MTA that you reported on?
Yeah, so the MTA owns a significant portion of the land between West 225th Street and West 230th Street, and that's where they have their Marble Hill Metro North station and their train yard. And so engineers would need to access the water piping and infrastructure below those railroad tracks to complete Tibbetsburg project. And according to people close to negotiations, the MTA has not really been forthcoming about having discussions so far. They themselves have said that they have needed to use it's an essential connection line with the Hudson Line, the Grand Central Terminal. There are rumors that the MTA was considering moving its waste management from Grand Central Terminal to Marble Hill Transfer Station, and the MTA did not comment on that. But those are major concerns.
There's a couple of things at work here that relate to the last conversation we just had. Number one, transparency. Nobody really knows. We're trying to find out. So that is one common denominator between the two. The other thing is, let's be clear, if they were to build that cricket stadium, it would be just yards away from where this huge environmental project is. Imagine, kind of, for want of a better word, the stupidity of doing something that is not environmentally sound yards away from something you're spending $150 million to do. I'm trying, man, but I'm not finding the logic here.
Yeah, it seems that the area has major interest for major projects, and they definitely seem to clash with each other a bit. But like you said, there isn't much transparency with either of them. But for the MTA's credit, they have said on the record that they're very interested in engaging in conversations with the city. But there seems to, at least we know a lot more with this project than we do with the cricket stadium.
Well, yes, and this one, is much further along. But it's funny, it took 20 years. So if it's going to take 20 years to do the other thing, that's not going to work out. Anyway, Jonathan, you working on anything that we should know about? I whispered it because we don't want to spill the beans.
Not ready to share quite yet, but I've done some recent stories on flooding in apartments in Wakefield.
Yes,
and Bronxlandia, an event space in the South Bronx.
Oh, right. That would listen. If we had more time, we would do it. Listen, you're the best, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for reporting on stuff that we didn't get anywhere else, and that's obviously vital to the people of the Bronx. And I'm sure we'll see you around town.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Great. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, the community I was talking about is the Garifuna community, and we're going to talk about where they're at, and they have a big event coming up. We'll be right back.